graders, we're on lesson 5.3, learning to add fractions and mixed numbers. You will need your whiteboard marker, and your math journal too. What I'd like you to do is find another name for each fraction or mixed number without changing the denominator. So we've been finding common denominators, but for this warm-up, let me give you an example. So if I take 7/2, I can write that as 1 and 5/2, because what I'm going to do is trade 2 halves for 1 whole, right? So when I subtract 2 away from that to get the 1 whole, I'm left with 5. Let me go ahead and do one more for you. If I take 2/3, I can keep the thirds. That's what I want to do. I'm going to borrow from the 2 and add 3/3 on. So there's 1 already there, so 1 and 4/3. Would you please do 19/4? Pause your video. Well, I could just turn this into a mixed number. Let's say, how many 4s are there in 19? Well, there's 4 with 3 left over. So 4 and 3/4 is another way to name that. All right, let me show you one more, and then you can do number 2 and 3. 36/5 is an improper fraction. So how many 5s are there in 36? Well, there's 7 with the remainder of 1. Remember, keep 5ths the same, keep 8ths the same, keep 7ths the same. So another way to name that is 7 and 1/5. Would you please pause your video and on your whiteboard, change 4 and 3/8 and 1 and 8/7 into another name. Do not change the denominator. Pause your video. Well, I could take 4 and 3/8. I could borrow from there and add 8/8. 8/8 is the same as the 1 whole that I borrowed. So add 8 plus 3 is 11/8. I could even do that one more time. Add 8/8 because that's equal to the 1 that I just borrowed. And I could say 2 and 19/8. 1 and 8/7 is the same as 2 and 1/7. So if I take away 7/7 from that, which equals 1, and add that to the whole number, there you go. All right, let's move into our math journal. Let's move to page 160. And at the top, it says adding fractions and mixed numbers. Choose the best estimate for each problem, then write the answer for any problem that you can solve mentally. So, first one says 2/5 plus 1/4. Well, 1/4 and less than 1/2, if I added those together, it would be about a half. And in my head, I know that I would change each one to 20ths. Times 4 here, this would be 8/20 times 5. So if I did that in my head, I would get 13/20. Number 2, if I add 1/9 plus 4/9 plus 3/9, well, this is pretty small, but this is a little less than half, so together that equals a half. This is pretty close to half. So I would say that's about equal to 1. These 3 fractions I can add in my head. The denominators are all the same, so 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. Very close to 1 whole. Number 3, 3/4 and 5/8. Well, they're both, one's a little more than a half and the other one's a little more than half. So I'm going to say it's a little more than 1 whole. I can easily change this one to 8 by multiplying the denominator and the numerator by 2. So 6/8 plus 5/8 equals 11/8. That's an improper fraction, so I could change it to a mixed number. Moving down to the bottom, still on page 160. Now we're looking at some mixed numbers. So if I look at 4/5, which is equal to almost 1 whole, 2/3, which is pretty close. So I would call these together 1, probably a little more than maybe 1.5. So 2 plus 1 is 3, plus 1 is 4. Should be about 4.5. So that would be between 4 and 5. If I change those, I could change them to 15ths. Multiply the top times 3 to get 12 15ths. Multiply the bottom by 5. Get 10 15ths, which is 22 15ths. And 2 plus 1 is 3. So that would equal 4 and 7 15ths. That one, obviously, you're not going to do in your head, so you don't have to write that. Number 5, though, I could do in my head. 7 and 2 16ths. Denominators are the same, so it makes it really easy to add. So it's a little more than 7. And the last one we can easily do in our head as well. 7 plus 3 is 10/8. 2 plus 1 is 3. So this actually equals 4 and 2/8. So a little more than 4. Moving on to journal page 161. Solving addition problems with fractions and mixed numbers. So it says estimate each sum and then solve, show your work. So if we estimate 3 and 4/7 and 4 and 4/7 is close to 3.5, and I can add those easily in my head. 3.5 plus 4.5, go ahead and write down this equation, equals about 8. Now let's actually go ahead and add. 4 and 4 is 8, 8/7. And 3 plus 4 is 7, but let's change that to no longer be an improper fraction. So I'm going to take 7/7 from that and add that whole number to the 7 to get 8. And I'm left with 1/7. 8 and 1/7. Number 2, the estimate. Well, 6 and 3/4, that's pretty close to 7. 1/6, actually pretty close to 0. So I would say that our answer should be close to 7. Now, we need to find a denominator. I can multiply 6 times 4 to get 24, or I could write out the multiples, find the first one that they have in common. First one that they have in common is 12, so I'm going to change them each to 12ths. And I have to write kind of small. Multiply the denominator and the numerator times 3 to get 9/12. Multiply the bottom and the top by 2 to get 2/12. 9 plus 2 is 11/12, and 6 plus nothing gives you 6. 6 and 11/12 is very close to 7. Number 3, 7/8 is pretty close to 1 whole, and 1/6 is pretty close to 0. So it should be 1. It's going to be right around 1 whole. Now, this time, I'm just going to multiply the denominator and the two denominators to get a common denominator. 8 times 6 is 48. It's not the smallest one. So if I wrote out those, I know that 24 is the first denominator they have in common. But this is just one way, and I'm going to use 48 for this one. So I'm going to multiply by 6 on the denominator, so I do that on the numerator. Multiply by 8 on the denominator and numerator. I get 42 plus 8 is 50 48, but I'm going to change that to a mixed number. I'm going to take away 48 48 to get 1, and 2 is left over on the top. 1 and 2 48. Number 4, 7 2/3 is pretty close to 8. And 2 3/5 is pretty close to 2 1/2. Makes it easy to add. My answer should be close to 10 1/2. I'm going to change my denominator to be 15ths. I cannot add or subtract fractions unless they have the same denominator. Multiply the denominator times 5 and the numerator times 5 to get 10 15ths. Multiply the denominator times 3 and the numerator times 3 to get 9 15ths. 10 plus 9 is 19 15ths. 7 plus 2 is 9. But I'm going to take away 15 15ths. That equals 1 whole. I'm going to add that to my whole number to get 10. And 19 minus 15 is 4 15ths. That's pretty close to 10 1/2. Moving down the page. For each number story, write a number model with an unknown, which is a variable like the letter X or Y or R, and make an estimate. Then solve the story. Show your work, which I always want you to do, 5th graders. Record your number and a summary number model. Use your estimate to check whether your answer makes sense. Mr. Kumar's class ate 6 3/4 pizzas, and Miss Reinhardt's class ate 4 2/4 pizzas. How many pizzas did the two classes eat? So 6 3/4 plus 4 2/4. Write that with a variable. I'm going to put the lowercase p for pizzas. My estimate would be this is close to 7, 6 3/4. 4 2/4 is the same as 4 1/2, so I can easily add that in my head. They ate about 11 1/2 pizzas. Let's see if that's the case. I'm going to take 6 3/4 plus 4 2/4. 3 plus 2 is 5/4. We would never say someone ate 5/4 of a pizza, so we're going to change that to a mixed number in just a moment. 6 plus 4 is 10. 4/4 would be the same as 1 whole pizza, so I'm going to take 4/4 away from that. Add that 1 whole pizza, the 4/4, which becomes 11 pizzas. And then I took away 4/4 and added that to the whole number, so I'm left with 1/4. So they ate 11 1/4 pizzas. You can write that on the next line. Number 6. Melanie's superhero costume for the school play requires 1 5/6 yards of green fabric and 1/3 yard of yellow fabric. How many total yards, so we're going to be adding when we're trying to find the total number, of fabric are needed for the costume? I'm going to take 1 5/6 plus 1/3 to get F for fabric, the unknown. Well, 1 5/6 is pretty close to 2, and 1/3, I'm just going to say 0. So she's going to need about 2 yards of fabric in all, or total. Now let's rewrite these fractions so that it's easier to find a common denominator. Here I'm going to use multiples. 3, 6, 9. The first number they have in common is 6. So I'm going to change, I don't need to change the 5, 6. It's already 6. I'm going to change the third to 6. Multiply the denominator times 2, so I multiply the numerator times 2, and now I can add. 5 plus 2 is 7 6. 1 plus nothing is 1. If you went to Joann Fabrics or Walmart and asked for 7/6 of a yard, they would say, what? So what we're going to do is we're going to take away 6 6, which equals 1 whole yard of fabric, and add that to the 1 to get 2. So 2, and then I took away 6 6 to add to the whole number. I'm left with 1 6. So I need 2 1/6 yards. 2 and 1/6. So 1 and 5/6 plus 1/3 equals 2 and 1/6 yards. Remember, at any point in time, if you need to pause the video so that you can write down everything, do so, because you'll be taking a picture of these pages for Schoology. Charlotte ran 5 2/3 miles on Monday and 1 5/8 miles on Tuesdays. How many miles did she run in all? So it's adding them all up. 5 2/3 plus 1 5/8 equals, and I'll put M for miles. The estimate, 5 2/3, is pretty close to 5 1/2. And 1 5/8 is pretty close to 1 1/2. So I can add halves pretty easily in my head. A half plus a half is a whole. So 5 plus 1 plus another 1 equals 7 miles. Let's go ahead and write this down vertically. 5 2/3 plus 1 5/8. I'm just going to multiply the denominators times each other. 8 times 3 is 24. So I'm going to change each one to 24ths. I'm going to multiply by 8 in the top fraction. Whatever I do to the denominator, I must do to the numerator. 2/3 is the same as 16 24ths. I'm going to multiply the denominator in the bottom fraction times 3 and the numerator times 3 to get 15 24ths. 24ths remains the same. I'm going to add 16 plus 15 to get 31. 5 plus 1 is 6. But I'm going to change that improper fraction. I'm going to subtract 24ths, which is equal to 1 whole mile. Add that to the whole number. 31 minus 24. 11 minus 4 is 7. So we're left with 7 24ths. And then we always want to put a label as to her. Did she run that in yards? Did she run that in kilometers? Did she run that in feet? So at the bottom, please write in our final equation and answer. 7 and 7 24ths. So 5 2/3 plus 1 5/8 equals 7 7 24ths miles. That is it for this lesson.